Sarah asked if I'd be interested to speak just about a little bit about my experience in doing the MBA program here at UNC. And I did check with Dell and just make sure, that it's something that, because it's a little bit not ENT related, would be worthwhile. And then he thought it would be. And we'll try to relate it to what we do, as much as I can here. But again, just if you have questions, just let me know. So as you can see there, we're not too far from the school over there. It's just kind of behind the deck if you walk that way.
Even closer to Dean.
That's right, very close to Dean. And I do spend a fair amount of time at the Rizzo Center as well. So, in thinking about, why to pursue kind of some extra experience or training in business-related things, you think a little bit about, well, why'd you go into medicine in the first place? And I think they're very different things. I mean, we've all chosen medicine for a variety of reasons, to help people, to teach, to serve our fellow man, very, very noble pursuits. And some of you might recognize Simon Sinek there. He's worth looking up. He's a good speaker and can talk a little bit about just why you get into things and what motivates you. That's actually my dad down in the lower right corner doing his thing back in World War II, checking out some airmen with, I don't know.
It's actually the lower left corner.
I'm sorry.
Dyslexia will not hurt you.
Lower left for you all. And so in just thinking a little bit about why we all choose medicine, a few quotes came to mind. I've been wanting to use this quote all year, thinking it was Winston Churchill, and looking for a talk to put it in. When I finally got around to putting it in a talk and researched a little bit, it turns out it's falsely attributed. And no one knows who said it, but I still think it's a good quote. You make a living by what you get, you make a life by what you give. And I have one from Dr. Bailey here as well.
Get it right off.
You make a living by what you get, you make a life by what you give.
There you go.
And a nice one from Dr. Bailey as well. I need to work in your sailing quote. That's really a classic as well. But another one I like to include is this one by Dr. Bailey. May we always keep the needs of our patients foremost in our minds and in our hearts as we study, learn, and practice the science and art of medicine. So these are sort of some nice things to keep in mind for why we do what we do. And, and healthcare is kind of an altruistic pursuit, but healthcare is also a pretty big business. And I think that's important for us all to keep in mind going forward, too. Healthcare represents 17+% of U.S. GDP, or $3.65 trillion. And it's our largest employer now, just became that in the last year or so, with over 16 million employees in the U.S. And 10 of the 20 fastest growing occupations are in healthcare as well. Let's see. Here's basically the big problem, and that is that healthcare expenditures in the United States are just basically out of control. And you can see that's us all the way over to the left. We're 20% ahead of the next developed country, more than 2.5 times the OECD or developed countries average in healthcare expenditures. But one of the problems is we don't get much, necessarily value for our healthcare, or it could be argued that all that spending does not necessarily lead to an equal level of outcomes. So on the left here, you can see life expectancy in the United States, even below the average of developed countries. Over on the right, infant mortality, not where you want to be, which I find a bit surprising, but much higher than the average when it comes to deaths per 100,000 live births. And another big issue is bankruptcies in healthcare. I mean, this isn't true in all the sort of countries we consider ourselves peers with. 65% of bankruptcies in the United States are tied to medical issues. Either because of the high cost for care or missing time from work. Much of the country lives on a pretty razor-thin margin when it comes to healthcare costs. Now, this chart to the left there are a lot of factors in why bankruptcies are declining over the past few years, but what they're arguing there that, at least in some part, it's related to some of the healthcare reform that we had, and it shows some of the timeline of the steps in the ACA rollout, Affordable Care Act rollout, and how they coincide with a decrease in bankruptcies, at least to some degree. And so, where does all this money go that we goes to healthcare in the United States? Well, as you can see here, a huge percent of it goes to hospital care. Probably in the public's mind, the minute you talk about healthcare spending, they think physicians, right? And we're a significant wedge there, but probably not as big. All right, someone will not stop paging me. A significant percentage, nonetheless, and then you have to think a little bit about where does the funds come from for all this, right? So you can see health insurance there at 75%, and when you break that down a little bit, you see the majority of that, more than half, is public funding for healthcare, Medicare, Medicaid, and other programs. I included the debt clock there at the bottom. It's always a pick-me-up if you want to go to that site, usdebt.org. But the bottom line is that none of these wedges is increasing, right? Our wedge is going to get squeezed. And the reason for that is, as you can see at the very bottom there, we spend, every budget cycle, we just spend more and more on the interest on our debt. And so what this means is that basically what we do is just going to get squeezed. And it's one of the reasons that I think we should play a little bit bigger role in being involved in, how healthcare funds are controlled and how they're allocated, basically. Another just demographic point is that we, this is the baby boomer generation up here around 50s and 60s, and the way our healthcare system is designed is that the younger working folks, kind of in this middle area, are there we go, are paying for retirees and their healthcare costs, which obviously get a lot more expensive as you age. And so going forward, it's basically going to be a problem. Now one solution to that would be a massive influx of immigrants, and which is ironic currently. But one of the solutions for us would be we basically have a desperate need for immigration to help support our healthcare expenditures. And you can just turn it off, maybe. I don't know of any emergencies pending.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about in case
Yeah. But for our healthcare expenditures and our economy in general. So I'll leave it at that. Now, what does all that lead to, this squeezing of our wedge and cutting back on costs and how things are controlled? Well, it basically leads to stuff like this. The way that our fee-for-service system is so complex, and the rules that govern that, and things like us spending an additional hour or two on Epic every night for every additional hour of patient care that we do. Now, this is not to bum anyone out, but let's see. But the idea is just that I think these things are going to make more sense the more that we play a role in them. It leads to stuff like this too. I just opened our own bulletin from the Academy and just browsed a little to see what was in there that might be fun. The cover looks inviting, and so I read through. It said, unlike the MU program, ECs can receive partial credit for the ACI portion of the MIPS composite score using the qualified registry, EHR, QDCR. You get the point. But hopefully people really capitalized on that. But and of course they need a key just to understand the article. But not that this stuff's not important, but it is complex, and sometimes I wonder how much people like us on the front lines are helping to define it all. The good news is that we're in a specialty where people are pretty happy. This is a survey from this year from Medscape, over almost 20,000 physicians, and I think otolaryngology rates pretty well here. At 88% people would choose the same specialty and are fairly happy with what they're doing. So I think that's some positive news for us going forward. So with all, I guess what you would call a healthcare financing crisis, why might business experience or training more formally be valuable in ENT? Well, I think what these previous slides show you is that there is some huge change coming, and it's going to be rapidly increasing, essentially. We've already seen, what we would call unprecedented consolidation. That's essentially all the mergers we've seen among healthcare systems, and which is something to think about when it comes to cost going up further, as well as choices going down. At least there'd be concern in that regard. We're all in the middle of the early stages, I guess I would say, of a shift from fee-for-service to value-based care model for healthcare financing. And we simply have to have dramatic reductions in healthcare spending at some point. And so I think it's worth understanding how that's going to affect us and how we can help shape that. I think in the future we'll see increased use of physician extenders. I think we'll see telemedicine to some degree becoming a bigger part of what we do, is, at least the applications that serve to reduce cost and increase efficiency. I think we'll see outsourcing of care and ancillary services to some degree. Artificial intelligence and machine learning, to the degree that they impact efficiency will probably play a role. And we're starting to see new players, not traditionally in healthcare, kind of emerge. I mean, Google with Verily, Amazon, Apple are all kind of looking to get involved in healthcare. And there you can see some of the timeline of kind of Amazon's efforts over the last year or two to, their acquisitions and partnerships in anticipation of being more involved in our healthcare. And basically, I think it's best for us, it's in our best interest, the interests of our patients, those we train as well, that we play a role in helping to shape these changes, basically. And actually, I think in ENT, we're uniquely suited to do that. As ENT doctors, we bring a wealth of practical clinical knowledge and experience to the table. That's kind of our irreplaceable thing. You've slogged it out in clinic for 20 years, but you've gained an insight into how things really work and what's really needed, and a clinical experience that is essentially irreplaceable. And we serve a diverse patient population, so we understand the needs of all patients, young and old, and male and female. And a bit cliche, but we do combine elements of medicine and surgery in what we do, and we have a lot of cross-discipline interactions with other fields. So we understand how the hospital works, from an operational standpoint at many levels. So I think ENT is a uniquely suited field for leadership going forward, and involvement in kind of the business aspect of things. So how do we prepare for this? Well, I think a focus on leadership and management skills is critical. Understanding of healthcare financing, regulation, and operations, engagement in the political process, of course. A lot of people work hard to help us maintain our competitive advantages in the marketplace as ENT doctors, and also as a department and as an institution in our region here. And I think it's really important to have a clear understanding of our market as well. Dr. P might know Dr. Girard. I didn't, but his story is pretty amazing. He's not just an ENT doctor, not just a department chairman. He's the chancellor of the whole university over at Kansas. And he says that we don't have the luxury of just putting our heads down and doing what we do well. We need to be engaged in the design of our working systems, in our political environment, and in what happens in the future of our practices for the benefit of our patients. Just kind of summarizing what, the point I'm trying to make here. And so I'll just talk a little bit about, how does one kind of pursue extra experience or some type of training in business aspect of things. An MBA is sort of a well-known or traditional way, but there are some other degrees and programs that one can get involved in. Some programs across the states offer what's called a healthcare MBA, which is essentially an MBA just a bit more focused on the health aspect of things. And the core disciplines that make up an MBA really boil down to these four. And so I'm going to focus a little bit on them as we go through things here. But basically, and there are some miscellaneous things that I'll talk about a little bit as well. But basically, we're talking about leadership and management, about finance, operations, and marketing. Those are kind of the core disciplines that make up the curriculum. And what are the reasons to do it? Like, what are the payoffs of getting involved, getting MBA or some additional business training? Well, like for me, I was just genuinely interested in things related to investing and entrepreneurship, and so for me it was a bit of a natural, and I've really enjoyed the content. It helps to diversify your opportunities going down the road, give you a bit of a different set of skills and understanding. Would it help you advance within your current with your current employer? For us, that's an academic medical center. I think there's some possibility for that. There are many people on the School of Medicine side of things, like Cam Enerson, who came to speak to us last year, or on the healthcare system side of things that do have an MBA background. And then, there's always the possibility it may help you understand other opportunities outside of medicine as well. They talk about anytime you go to college or go to a graduate program, they talk about you expanding your network and things like that. And, but to a certain degree, I think it's true. On the next slide, I'll show some statistics on its impact on your salary. Now, I think that's pretty individual. I don't expect anyone to just say, man, you got your MBA, now we're going to give you more money. I mean, it's going to relate more to your ability to add more value, where you're working. There's a bit of the summary of the, sort of community of people that have passed through the business school at UNC, and I guess you could say your network might include some of the CEOs and alumni in Fortune 500 companies. But really the key is the network that I'm really taking away from it is the people in my class. You get to know them extremely well. They're from a real variety of backgrounds, and in all kinds of different industries, and you get really close to them. And so I think that's probably the best network that I think I'll be getting out of it. So what are the costs or the downsides of doing it? I mean, one is the cost of the program. I mean, it's not free, and I'll talk about that in a second. And the main one is really probably time. Obviously, it's going to take some time, and it's going to take away from other things you do, at work, your work, whether it's RVUs or OR utilization, and your family. There's my family. I didn't put the picture there because they're like low priority. This is to remind me that they're the highest priority. Sorry, guys. See you in 2 years. And then the other is just timing, when to do something like this if you're interested. Depending on certain times of your career, it might be vital to be working on growing your research or your practice, especially early on, or building your reputation locally or at the state level or nationally. So the timing of it can also be important. But the bottom line is it's going to take time away from something, and that's just important to be aware of. The other thing I would say is that it's not, obviously everything you learn over there is not related to medicine, and for some people I think that might be a bit off-putting, but for me I really enjoyed it. I mean, I thought it was fascinating to learn about other industries, whether it was airlines or energy or Amazon or Apple or just whatever, and a lot of times there's some lessons that we can take from the experience of those industries and companies. Just some nuts and bolts in terms of like what program to do. I mean, I'm most familiar with the one here at UNC, although there are online programs that give you access to programs all over the country. UNC currently has these 4 programs, so that would be full-time, like the folks a little bit closer to finishing college, online program, and then the evening and weekend make up what they call the executive MBA program. And so you can see the average age in that, the average amount of work experience prior to starting the program is 11 years there. And that program is that I'm doing is the evening program, so it's about 2 years. And basically I'm in class Monday evenings, and the cost was about $88,000. You can see they actually vary quite a bit. And a profile of my class, average age was 35, so I'm actually a bit of an old guy in my class. Not the oldest, but 11 years of work experience. 26% of my class had advanced degrees before starting the program. We represented 57 companies and employers, and I think this is a bit of an outlier. I mean, most classes aren't 50-50, but we're an outlier at only 23% women. And there's some of the companies represented in my little study group. We had one Major League Baseball player who had played for 10 years before joining us, Will Venable. But after a few months, he got an offer to be the first base coach for the Cubs, so he was out of there. He said he's coming back. I don't know. We'll see. But he was a nice guy. Great to meet him. But it's a diverse group. I mean, there's a lot of military people, a couple other, athletes, and people from just all walks of life and industries. Just the schedule of it. So for me, I'm there Monday evenings from 5:45 to 10. I'm just trying to guess, but it's variable, but maybe 8 to 12 extra hours a week beyond that of sort of meeting with your team. Almost all of that we do, online or virtually, just to save time. Teams are a big deal. I mean, you get assigned to one immediately. Almost every class you're in, you're forming some team to work on group projects. I sort of dreaded that at the beginning. I was like, oh man, I don't, that just slows you down. And I don't want to get involved in all that. And you know, I was sort of thinking I'll just do online to avoid that. And but honestly, it's really been one of the best parts of it. And you learn obviously how to work with other people, and you can, you know, and you get very efficient knocking a lot of work. I mean, my team will get on Google Docs, you know, live and knock out a 10-page paper in an hour. I mean, everybody's just live working on the same paper at the same time and chatting and talking. It's really amazing what a team can do once they, you know, get close and used to working together. I think we really have excellent online platforms for how they deliver us content. It's something that I think would be great for graduate medical education too. There's a lot of cost to that, and a lot of it is what represents that cost of the program. But this is the one we use in the evening program. It's called Canvas. Just an example of, you know, when I load up sort of my portal, each tile there would be one of my classes, and then as you open those and go through them, almost all of our lectures are online, as well as other content that, you know, offline that you would go through each week before class. And then they send us books, occasionally actual books, but mostly through Amazon Kindle or other online methods. And you know, I think overall, you know, I had a bit of a sense for what MBA program might be like in terms of people's attitude and focus. And you might get the sense like, man, everybody there probably wants to be like a stockbroker, or, you know, is focused on money. It really never came, you know, it almost never comes up. I mean, they obviously teach you to pursue profits for whatever reason, but you know, there's a lot more focus on entrepreneurship, on, you know, sustainable organizations and systems, and really just making a contribution to society overall, you know, just whatever field you're in. So it was kind of nice and refreshing, but very little focus on just like money as far as I could tell. The core courses that I took, you do so that you have to take, fell into these categories. And basically the leadership, finance, operations, and marketing, and then you can see some of them there. The classes that I chose to take as electives after you're done with your first year, there are many, but these are the ones that I took. And so I tried to take everything related to finance that was available, everything related to entrepreneurship that was available, and everything related to healthcare that was available. And I also took a very interesting class in marketing analytics. So I focused on those areas, and I'm getting a concentration in finance as well. But it gives you some sense for you know, the kind of the classes we take and the things they're teaching us. They do have quite a bit of available over there related to healthcare. So. And there's a lot of you know, like any of our graduate schools, like medicine or pharmacy, that, you know, they have a lot of programs and speakers to take advantage of. There were some good visiting speakers while I was there. There is a Center for the Business of Health, and they, as well as the Keenan Flagler Healthcare Club, and they have events and speakers and meetings and things like that, such as the UNC Business of Healthcare Convocation, which I participated in and spoke at this year. So let's go through maybe just each of these sort of core areas, and I'll try to give you some, you know, examples of how that, you know, can be useful to what it is we do, essentially. So, you know, is leadership and management important? I mean, absolutely. I mean, in a sense, we're all leaders in otolaryngology, you know, especially, you know, from the type of place we're at, and we're you know, most of us are kind of heading to in our careers. And, you know, I mean, just think about the kind of things that Dr. P and now Del, you know, kind of have to deal with, you know, corralling 150 plus people with different priorities, you know, in situations relating to budget constraints and personal conflicts and competition over resources, and you know, and how do you get all those people kind of in one direction and sharing some priorities and on a team doing what we do? Well, it's, you know, it takes some leadership skills, and you know, anytime you want to do something that's just more than yourself, you know, you're basically going to need some of these skills. So this, I put, if some of you know Admiral William H. McRaven, he's a bit famous for his 10 life lessons if you want to change the world, based on his basic SEAL training. And so a lot of these leadership lessons are very similar to his list, but this part here about needing, obviously, other people than yourself to accomplish anything significant relates to his lesson number 2, which is, if you want to change the world, you need to find someone to help you paddle, basically. But it's worth looking up his list. Does anyone know what the number 1 rule is of his top 10 life lessons.
Make your bed.
Yep, there you go. Make your bed. I like that one. I think about it every morning. The best part of it is, if you had a crappy day, at least your bed's made when you get home. I do that. I don't have everybody else in my family making their bed, but I'm working on it. So, but these skills include basically managing teams, conflict resolution, negotiation, change management, achieving power and influence. Sounds strange, but you can't get much done if you can't wield some power and have some influence in your organization or institution. And each one of these is a different discipline and worth a talk in itself, essentially. But essentially, I think when you think about being a leader, especially at a place like this, it's generally, these are people that, have gotten to the point where they're primarily interested in the advancement of other people, and the good of the institution in general. And I think that's, who it works out best for when people get into these positions. This is another Simon Sinek concept called playing the infinite game. And, perhaps it's a bit timely or untimely, but his point, it's worth looking up the video, but his point is that we need to be infinite players, as he calls it, not finite, in that we're evaluating. What we need to be doing is evaluating and improving ourselves on a continuous basis, not just looking to land one notch above our competition in the short run. And, it's about kind of pursuing our own particular values and our own pursuit of quality, right? And the idea is that this isn't like, a finite game, and we don't win eventually, but we sort of pursue our values and maintain quality as we see it. So worth looking up. I think it's a good explanation of really what we already do. So finance. Does anyone have what does finance mean basically? Any thoughts? Kind of like an amorphous concept really till you sort of dig into it a little bit, but there's different definitions. I think the Wikipedia one's actually probably the best one I could find, but it's basically concerned with how we allocate assets and resources and our liabilities over time, and generally this is done in a condition of not knowing everything or uncertainty for the most part. It involves capital allocation decisions. For a company, this might be how they choose different assets and how they whether they do dividends or stock buybacks. It involves determining basically the proper mix of how you're paying for stuff. Are you using debt to pay for stuff, or are you using equity to pay for stuff in the in the corporate world? But from our standpoint, I think we can learn a lot from finance in terms of just that is more applicable to what we do every day. And so we all make decisions about whether to pursue this route or buy that piece of equipment or add this position to the department. And so how do you evaluate that? We all hear the word pro forma a lot. I remember when I was working on a pro forma for Carolina Points, so way back, I didn't really know what that meant, but I made one anyway, and I did my best. When I look back on it, I was missing a few things, but I knew that was the key word. And then a really important concept, when it comes to finance, is probably the most important concept is the time value of money, right? So let's see, I got to pick on something. Mike, what is more valuable to you? If I give you $1,000 now, or if I give you $1,000 next year, which would you rather have?
Same $1,000.
Yeah. Well, yes. Yeah, right. Always. I mean, you can make money with that $1,000 now. I mean, so that is basically what the time value of money means, and it's important to think about that. I mean, if you're planning for the future and you don't take account of that sort of thing, you're going to make it's going to really mess up your decisions. So I'm not going to throw too many formulas at you, but this is actually, it's the same formula. And it just helps you quickly think about, or calculate what the present value of something is, something in the future, or what the future value of something is, presently. So let's say, you're just thinking of anything we might do, like, like I said, add a position, buy a piece of equipment, whether you should, spend money on going to medical school, things like that. I mean, these are important decisions to make. So how do you evaluate that? Well, for one, you want to think about just all the, a terminology would be cash flows, but basically you're talking about the costs and the return on these things. You want to think about the rate. When Mike says this $1,000 is worth more now than it would be, next year, there's some rate associated with that explains why, interest rate. And we're trying to decide between, say when we're trying to decide between two mutually exclusive projects, we want to assign some value to these two projects and then make a decision between them. Really, there's a couple ways to do this. You might, what I'm getting at with this is what people commonly call the net present value, and that can be calculated. If it's greater than 0, basically it's a project worth doing, and a higher net present value gives one project, sort of an advantage over another. People also use something called the internal rate of return, which has to do with their own sort of internal interest rate. And another simple way might be just be payback period. I mean, if you buy a new microscope, and it helps you generate more money, well, how long does it take you to pay off the microscope? Is it 3 years? Is it 5 years? And that can be compared and give you some sense for whether something's worth pursuing. So let's do an example. Dr. Buckmeyer is interested in purchasing a new laser for the clinic, and he's considering 2 different brands. And so he speaks to Dell, and they realize their discount rate or their interest rate related to this is about 10%. Laser A costs $4,000 up front and is expected to generate $2,300 annually for 3 years. Laser B, this clinic laryngeal laser, costs nothing up front. They just let you pay for it later, and but is expected to generate $2,000 annually for 3 years, and the $4,000 same price is due at the end of year 3. So, which laser should we buy for Dr. Buckmeyer, if any? Hopefully he's got his numbers together for us, and then we can make that decision. Who thinks laser A? Some of you might be able to do the calculations quickly, and who thinks laser B?
You just need to look at it.
So which one?
Laser B.
Okay, very good.
But you know
That's
what?
why he's
There's
the
another
boss.
thing. There's another thing
Sorry.
you're not thinking about here, Austin.
Yes, sir.
I had to think about, because when Robert wanted to buy a new video system or a new strobe,
This
it was
example's
not,
really.
it didn't come from nothing. So I had to think about how much that would impact the quality of his practice.
Mm-hmm.
And he was very persuasive, and I really love it. So I said, if you really think this makes a difference, we'll do it. But you're talking, what was that, $88,000, Robert? And so I just ponied up the money, and we did it. Now that was good, because at that point in time, I controlled all the money. I didn't have a bunch of yahoos over there controlling the money. So I got what's good for my man, and it worked out great. And that has really helped us to become more effective because of the credibility we have in our practice. So you got to think about that too. It's not just whether it's cost benefit, it's the credibility you need to have in a place like this.
Absolutely. I didn't know this would be like quite such a close to home example. I made it up. But Robert's always asking for stuff. But and yeah, everybody's scheming. What can I do with that money? And obviously that is true. And these are multifactorial decisions, and there are a lot of factors. But it helps to start from the basic costs of something. And I think if you're making arguments, for capital budget at the hospital or other projects within the department or elsewhere in your life, it helps to start with a look at the numbers. And so these are what we would call the cash flows. It's really just a simple way of laying that out so it makes more sense to us. Laser A is $4,000 up front. You can see the money it generates annually. Same for laser B, and that $2,000 and minus $4,000 for laser B are in the same year. So do you just add those up? You can't, because you have to account for the time value of money. So we have to use our little formula that we talked about earlier up in the right-hand corner. It's actually not that complicated, and literally Excel will do it for you. But each one of those steps has to be discounted by its year. Okay, and so what that leads to is laser B being the winner with a net present value of $1,900 something instead of $1,700 something. So Dr. P was right. And Robert was as happy as when he got his bedazzled jacket. Everybody's happy. So let's talk a little bit about what a proforma is. A proforma is basically a projection. So it's using one of the common financial statements and projected out into the future, so that you can make an argument or show someone that a project or that you're planning or a hire that you're planning is likely to do better in the future, or at least what it will do in the future. And what are the common financial statements? I mean, there are balance sheets. This is a report of your assets and liabilities at a specific point in time. When you look at companies, they're going to have shareholder equity also. That wouldn't be the case, for UNC, but we still have a balance sheet. An income statement is probably the most commonly used financial statement for doing a pro forma. It's similar to a P&L report. You can really just boil it down to sort of revenue and costs and deposit, the net income. And we'll show an example of that in a second. This is over a period of time. So a balance sheet is one point in time. If you look up Apple's balance sheet, it'll say this is on December 31st, 2018. An income statement's over a quarter or over a year. Same with the statement of cash flows. A statement of shareholder equity is sort of the fourth most common one, but this relates a little bit more to companies and explains, owner or shareholder's equity as shown on the balance sheet. So just as an example, this is a sample pro forma, and it's an income statement, and so you have your revenue and your expenses and basically your net income, and you might just start with your current year. These numbers are completely made up, so they don't relate to anything. They're not meant to represent true numbers in any way. But let's just look at this as an example of using a pro forma to decide whether we should hire more attendings. What number of attendings should we have? Now this again does not relate at all. It's a fictional department, I guess. So you might put in some information that an attending does 2 clinics. You might start with the starting point that an attending generates 75 RVUs per clinic, and there's the dollars per RVU. So what that allows you to do is calculate, our income from clinic. I added maybe some consulting that we do. Again, fictional, just made up dollars. And there's a total, and then there's some expenses for us. Now projecting out this way, we made some assumptions. Each year we increased our clinic income by 7%. We increased our consulting income by 2%, and then these expenses, staff, salary, overhead, supplies, we increased by 1%, with the best information we had available. And what did that show us for net income? Well, it showed us we're losing money this year, but as we go forward, if these projections and assumptions hold true, then we expect an increase, a positive net income in future years. And that's the kind of thing that you prepare for people to show them, to make an argument for a project or something.
You see, the thing about that, Austin, the fallacy of that is if you're having a 7% annual increase, but you're not increasing salary very much at all,
right.
I can see.
Right.
It means you got 2 attendings. They're not going to do 75 RVUs. They're getting their ass kicked in 2023, and they're not going to be very happy. And if you look at what that costs you, you're not going to break even in 2023 if you add another person.
Right. Well, and again, this is really fictional just to show
I'm telling you the way this works. I thought about this on a number of occasions.
But I want to point out one other thing that you can do with these, and so why are some of these cells highlighted in color? Well, what you can do here is basically make a model that runs this as a model, taking into some uncertainty, and so and it will generate statistics for you that basically help guide you to the correct choice. So what we have here is the number of attendings. That's our input, which we can vary. And we've given it a range of 18 to 27 attendings. This green bar is uncertain, so you can assign to that cell an uncertainty. It could be, and I gave it a normal distribution. So basically every time it runs the model, it's going to pick a number in the normal distribution around 75, and then the whole purpose of this is to generate our net income in year 2023. So what this will do is run through this model, whatever you want, 1,000 times, 10,000 times, and give you the answer for the number of attendings you should hire to maximize your net income, with a high degree of certainty. So this particular add-on package for Excel is called Crystal Ball, but it's pretty neat stuff, and it allows you to really make good arguments, in my opinion. So we would call that a decision cell, an assumption cell. That's the one that is variable. You could give it a uniform distribution, a normal distribution, a skewed distribution, depending on what you feel is the case. And this is the cell we're seeking to maximize. But I think I'll leave it there, but just some of the capability for performance. Let's talk about operations for a sec. Maybe someone else could take a stab at defining what operations is. What do you think? Not Dell. Past Dell. Won't pick on Dell.
It describes how a system works
by like a summation of like, individual numbers, instead of like it's the appraisal of how those individual parts come together.
I think that's a really good definition. And so, when people study operations, they look at transformation processes. Some inputs go in, something happens here in our clinic, and then patients walk out the door cured or improved and treated. And so the goal of operations primarily is to look at the highest level of efficiency, okay? And so some of the metrics in what it would be called process analysis, the effort to improve your efficiency, would be throughput rate, throughput time, the total time people are in the process. We could say our clinic, for an example. Inventory, the number of patients that are stuck in clinic, are they piling up or are they getting taken care of and moved along? And at each step, as you mentioned, we want to think about the capacity, the amount of productive capability. This leads to a maximum quantity of output per unit time. And so when they say things like utilization over at the hospital, this is what they're getting at. The percent of time a resource is busy. So your throughput rate divided by your capacity at a certain step. So let's, there's an extremely simple input and output, but these get very complex. Imagine the line at Toyota Motors or GM, in terms of an operations standpoint. And so let's do one more example just real quickly. Let's say Dr. Clark wants to run a rhinoplasty walk-in clinic, and he thinks he can get a whole bunch of rhinoplasties done in a day. And there are various steps to this, though. People are walking in to have a rhinoplasty done, a bit unorthodox, but there's the front desk. There we have 2 people that check in 8 patients per hour, and they work 8 hours per day. Amber, who helps Madison, she's just one person, but she checks in, she pre-ops 6 patients per hour. She works 10 hours a day. Dr. Clark can do 3 cases an hour. He only takes him 20 minutes to do a rhinoplasty, and he works 12-hour days. And then in the recovery room, they have 4 beds, 30 minutes to recover a patient. And so how do you look at this and tell what is the capacity of this system? How many rhinoplasties can be done a day?
Capacity. There's no damn way.
Right, absolutely. So we made some assumptions about Madison that are unrealistic.
Right. About Amber and about everybody else here too.
But just as an example, so what you want to do is get all this into the same units. That's just the main point here, okay? All of that, whether it's beds or people or hours or how long a day they work, needs to be converted into some similar units, so patients per day. So if we were looking at what's the holdup in this process, or what people would call the bottleneck step in this process flow diagram. Yes, it's Madison, right? So no matter what we do, what is the capacity of this whole process? How many patients per day can we do? 36, right. You can't do more than 36 because that's Madison's capacity. So, what can you do about this? How do we increase the capacity of our system? Any thoughts? What's that? Well, that's one idea, right? Increasing capacity at that step. So that, literally increasing capacity at that step would be one potential idea. But I will say, what's a really key problem with this whole idea of having a walk-in rhinoplasty clinic? Todd, do you have any ideas? You should know this really well right now. You don't know what's coming, right? They're not scheduled, and this is a particular problem. The biggest place it happens in our practice is consults, right? You don't know the demand for the day. You might know average demand over the month, and try to prepare for that, but every day is really variable. So the idea of a walk-in rhinoplasty clinic is a terrible idea.
It's also the same idea as people trying to get these same-day evaluations. All these departments trying to guarantee that somebody can get in with 24 hours. You never know how many people that are going to be, right?
It is very important to think about in all the things that people kind of propose for us to do. If we don't have some predictability to our demand, things are going to go really haywire, and units or inventory, in our case, patients are going to back up at each of these steps and be unhappy. So an important thing to think about. Now, there are other ways to deal with this. You could do what's called resource pooling, meaning say Amber helps Madison. She's not busy all the time like Madison, so she's not at 100% capacity. Perhaps she could help him with the surgeries and improve his capacity. And another technique is called batching. You sort of combine tasks and do them at the same time. But one key point here is to be aware of 100% utilization. a lot of times from the hospital, I feel like their goal for us is 100% utilization. The minute one of these steps is at 100% utilization, everything backs up. Think of pack you hold. Think of the floor. I mean, these are all steps in our flow, and the minute they're at 100% utilization, you're in trouble. I mean, these things hum along best at 80 to 85% utilization. So it sort of irritates me when you hear people say, or giving you a tough time because you're not at 100% utilization. It doesn't actually make sense. So quickly on marketing, in my mind, marketing just meant advertising. I think before I started the program, and I actually learned quite a bit. What is marketing? Well, this article up here gave 72 definitions from people in the industry, so obviously it can really vary, but it's basically the activities of promoting and selling products or services, and include market research and advertising. In a sense, it encompasses all of business enterprise. Classically, people talk about segmentation, which means kind of defining the market. You have like different groups of people who are interested in different things. Are you interested in sort of fast, small cars, or are you interested in like minivans and things like that? What segment is the market in for our services, or in other industries like cars as well? Targeting means basically selecting your market, and positioning is everything else. Developing products that serve these segments. Changing the attributes on products. In our case, it might be changing the services we offer in clinic to help serve these markets. And more marketing is about big data. So when you hear about big data, enormous data sets, these are tremendously important in marketing. And it's an effort to understand what drives the choices of consumers and patients. We did a lot of linear regression, logistic regression, cluster analysis. There's predictive modeling, and all this kind of leads to the machine learning, which is very important in marketing, and probably will be very important in what they do to control healthcare costs. But the bottom line is it helps us to provide better service and to care for our patients better and to be more competitive, true. For me, it helped me to achieve a better understanding of statistics just for interpreting research. I mean, it was a great refresher on statistics for just looking at the literature. Obviously, marketing includes product development, pricing, advertising, sales, brand management. Just one bit of sort of business psychology I thought was fun. It was an example we had in class, and I think you can use it, in your own life and self-promotion, when necessary in your career. But they did a little experiment, these guys in 2009, called the Significant Objects Project, and they bought a couple hundred things on eBay. With essentially no description, just strange little knickknacks, and then they relisted them, but included a one-page description by a creative writer. And they didn't make anything up or lie or anything like that, but they gave sort of a story to these objects and try to reach people on a bit more of a personal level. Think about this when you're handing in your CV. Is it just a list of this school and this year and this, or is there some way to maybe more personalize that, or and so basically the average, and these were submitted to the same types of auctions where they were purchased. So the average increase in value was 28 times increase in value. This whatever odd horsehead model went from 99 cents to 62.70 with a really strong creative story behind it. So just something to kind of remember. I put grant writing. I don't know how much works into grant writing, but everything could use a little bit better story and personal touch. And, certainly in thinking of your own brand and negotiations and your own competitive advantage. For people who don't have to run, I'll talk a little bit about strategy and innovation and investing. I'm happy to talk about it. It's an interest of mine, of course. It should be of all of ours, but it might be for another day. We'll see. The things they teach about strategy are just like how to sort of think about your business environment. Like, who are our competitors? Who are our customers? It may seem fairly straightforward, but it isn't always. Classically, they talk about, that there's a model called Porter's 5 Forces when you look at any industry. And so you're thinking about your suppliers, your customers, people who might enter your industry like Amazon or Apple or Google, and the threat of substitute products. We're authoring healthcare. Could someone just go do something else like alternative medicine? Well, maybe. I don't know. And then, of course, there's your competitors that you have already. And when you're thinking of competing, sometimes we feel a bit isolated from the direct competition world of industry, but when you're thinking of competing, you want to think about what is your competitive advantage. Are we the cheapest? Are we the most have the most quality? Do we offer something very specific and narrow? These are all ways to sort of offer something in the marketplace over others. And I'm sure they think a lot about that when they're thinking about what we offer over Wake Med, or what we offer over Duke, and things like that, or what we offer to insurers that make deals with us for their insured patients. And there's sort of a quick graph of our industry. Who are our customers? I mean, are our customers the patients? I mean, that's what comes to mind first. But are our customers also health plans and insurers? I mean, in a sense, yeah. And so it's helpful to kind of remember some of those things. There is a lot of emphasis in school on innovation and entrepreneurship. I'll sort of cruise through this quickly, but I think it's something that a lot of people have an interest in. It's, you'd like to sort of make a contribution in your field, and maybe you thought of something new. I think it's a natural for surgeons, and so they do teach you a lot about that. It's really a topic for a whole nother talk and course, and actually doing 3 courses in the series on it. But I think that I made up my own quote here. I think there's something about ENT that makes it one of the strongest fields in medicine for innovation. I can do another talk on it sometime, but I have a talk on innovation and the history of our innovation in ENT and current innovation and entrepreneurship in ENT, and I think we're a natural as far as a field for that. There's some of the things that I hope have been somewhat innovative that I've tried to work on over the years. Some adapters for the phone, our 3D printed temporal bones, our augmented.
How's that adapter for the phone doing? Are people buying it?
Well, I have differentiated myself by being very low cost, but it's an interesting one, and it's kind of on hold. But I've explored it again as part of being in business school because I think there's some potential for it. Especially as telemedicine kind of comes around. Is there a role for that? Possibly. Certainly, there are competitors. And then I was going to talk a little bit about investing, but I think it might be best left for another time. I think
too much crowd right now.
Yeah, but because it is highly important. It might be more important than how good you are at ENT, as far as your possibility to retire. And Ty talked last week about financial planning, and he and I spoke before his talk, and he sort of left the area of asset allocation and exactly what investments you would pick and how do you go about doing that. So maybe I can do a 5 o'clock talk sometime for people interested in that. I will leave it at that.
Well done, Austin.
No problem. Thank you guys.
Austin, I got a question.
Sure.
It seems like all the people getting into healthcare that you mentioned,
Yeah.
sort of atypical companies getting
Yes,
healthcare.
and this was in the slides you sent me too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The thing that concerns me about them is their expected return on capital is not insignificant.
Right,
And those
right.
companies don't typically invest in things that they want to get a less return on capital. So
Right,
you
right.
look at Amazon, their return on capital is probably 20%.
Right, right.
So all of these companies that are getting in that, they're not looking to leave more money in healthcare. They're looking to get their 20% on what they invest.
Right, right.
And then deliver care
Yeah.
for whatever's left over. So how does that,
Well,
how does that impact?
They may want to wait for them.
They're not doing it out of the goodness of their hearts, that's what I'm saying.
I think they feel that they can drive a certain amount of inefficiency out of the process and still take their return. But I think we need to worry about to what degree that squeezes our wedge. But yes, they're certainly getting involved in a big way. I mean, it's hard to conceive of how Amazon would be involved in our day-to-day healthcare financing and operations, but it was pretty hard to conceive of what they're doing now when they were a bookstore.
They're very good with operations.